Hello and welcome. You're watching CNBC Africa, and these are the highlights of the African Development Week 2017 right here in Dakar, Senegal. On the third day, we take a look at Africa's natural resources.
Natural resources are very important in terms of Africa's development. In fact, they're a staple component of, our overall development agenda. But natural resources, resources at the moment that are under, continuous scrutiny in meetings like this, mainly because we are, disproportionately affected by climate change and almost in the front line, I'd say, in terms of climate change impacts. You see places like the Horn of Africa as well that are facing problems related to desertification, which has implications for food security, nutritional security, water security, etc., etc. So this is the essence of our development, and therefore it has to be managed in a way that ensures that as Africa continues to develop in terms of its growth agenda, we're seeing more and more, many of our countries are urbanizing very rapidly. We're seeing more and more the African youth, migrating to other greener pastures. I mean, it really complicates matters for us if our natural resources, are not well developed and not managed the way they should. And we have other phenomenon that is affecting this. So therefore, this is why we want to bring this on the agenda setting table in the next couple of days to ensure that we're looking at this using a panoramic perspective to understand exactly how can Africa begin to also understand what it has and how it's going to be affected in the next coming years, as it already is in many other parts of the world.
There seems to be an over-reliance on these resources, but at the same time we see Africa trading mainly in raw materials. We don't have any agenda, or if there is, very little as far as value addition goes. What do we need to do? How far do we need to go to unlock this?
I think that has always been a problem. I mean, many people have suggested that we need to industrialize because we've got the natural resources. Many countries are coming to us for natural resources. In fact, there is a famous statement by Madame Zuma who said that we were colonized for our natural resources. Our place in the world economy will be defined by our natural resources, but yet we don't seem to have the tools to add value to these natural resources. So, I mean, one of them, the formula for getting out of this it's almost like a vicious circle sometimes, is for Africa to find ways of industrialization so that we can add value. I mean, people have cited the cocoa that's produced in different parts of West Africa, coffee, you eat of chocolate, but, the value added is not done in our countries, it's done somewhere else. So the aspect of industrialization is very important. I mean, but we are also saying that we can't just industrialize in any way. We have to industrialize smartly, which is why we are talking a lot about green industrialization. And in many ways, it's not a contradiction in terms to say that Africa is already green. But we do not have, for us to be able to add value to our resources, we have to find ways of making sure that we're not polluting the environment in the process of becoming greener or in the process of industrializing. So I think industrialization is high on the agenda, but it depends on how we do it, the scale at which we do it, how we add value, and how we add value without necessarily polluting our environment, because that's also going to be quite onerous in terms of cleaning up. We do not have time to industrialize and clean up later. We have to find a way of doing everything together.
We also revisited the conversation of urbanization and globalization, together with the very important fact of whether or not these two are backed up by industrialization. We caught up with Dr. Smita Srinivas, who is the director for the Tech Change Lab, as well as a visiting fellow at the London School of Economics, for a take on what we are getting right in the whole urbanization conversation.
I think one of the assumptions has always been that these things go together naturally, and there is nothing natural about it. I think in the history of industrialization and urbanization, some things have gone together. I don't think we can assume it anymore. If indeed we want to proceed with industrial development and really accelerate the kind of, positive growth cycles that we want to see, there's going to have to be some very explicit acknowledgement of what urbanization is about. And here we mean not just urbanization as in cities, big cities, but also thinking of kind of the larger ecosystem of learning and the interlinkages that exist. So it will be urban regional. And the question is, in different countries, what role is there for that type of planning?
Most of African cities have used primacy as a method of trying to encourage urbanization. This has obviously not worked in many places. Give us a sense of why this seems to be a very obvious solution, yet it doesn't work.
I think the reality is, well, at a very simple level, you can't have everyone living in one place or looking to this one place for jobs or opportunities. And if we really want to think not so much of balanced growth, because I don't believe growth is balanced, it is always going to be dynamic and changing, you nevertheless need an explicit acknowledgement of the criteria by which you distribute your resources. And those resources include people. And most firms and most individuals are going to move where the opportunities lie. And so it is part of the development planning process to distribute those a little bit more fairly. There are huge, not just environmental consequences, but huge human consequences if we don't do this.
Let's talk about agriculture for a moment, because, it has lagged behind in Africa when we talk about industrialization. We don't see it being at the driver's seat or just giving impetus to this. Why so?
I think historically we've always thought of industrial development in very narrow terms. Some of the old models saw it as agriculture to manufacturing and then to services. I don't think there can be anything more wrong when we look at that model today. The reality is people don't move in any systematic way between agriculture to manufacturing and then to services. If anything, most developing countries today are pointing to a very different series of transformations between agriculture, manufacturing, between manufacturing services and agriculture services. So managing these multiple transitions is what is going to define good industrialization. And as a consequence, good urbanization as well. If all urbanization is happening predominantly driven by a lack of opportunity or low productivity in agriculture, that's the worst form of urbanization you can imagine.
Right. There's also been a very interesting relationship between natural resources and urbanization. We've had instances where now rivers have human rights. So give us a sense of how do we draw the line and walk this tightrope of ensuring that whilst we urbanize and conserve, we're still able to hit those two birds with one stone?
Yeah, I think if we are positioning conservation at the expense of economic development, we're doing something wrong. We're not thinking very imaginatively. I'll give you an example of something I think we should worry about, which is the excessive use of antibiotics, for example, in factory farming, which has huge consequences not just for the animals involved, but certainly for the humans and the ecosystems of antibiotic resistance. So I think some of those issues should pull us to revisiting what we tend to think of as good ecosystems or conservation of a different type with a dynamic growth model nevertheless. I don't think these two things are antithetical at all. I think it is possible. I think we do have to think and imagine this process quite differently.
So the conversations here were brought to an abrupt end as delegates from the EU and the ECA could not agree on certain technical issues regarding the membership of the Western Sahara state as protested by Morocco. This led to an immediate cancellation of the Conference of Ministers that was set for next week. We got to catch up with Paddy Lehotle, who is the Statistician General at Statistics South Africa, for a feel of what the delegates thought went wrong.
Well, we least expected it, and I think we came underprepared for this kind of eventuality. That we could come and have 3 days dabbling on trivial and not really on substance of why we came here. It's really disappointing, it's disgusting. It sets a very bad precedent. It pours cold water on what we thought Agenda 2063 would do, on what the SDGs would do. We have been held ransom on legalese and things that do not count for the millions of people that we thought we would be looking at solving, whose problems we thought we would be solving. It's a wasted opportunity but it teaches us that we got to be prepared.
What does this say about integration efforts for Africa?
We have no choice. Africa has to integrate because then it will not survive. We have to understand that this integration costs and it requires determination and resolve. Above all, it requires science and numbers to be applied in understanding what integration is. That's what integration is about, that it can resolve poverty problems on the continent. We don't have a choice. We have to do so.
What did you propose as a way forward?
The way forward, yes, is we'll have to have this meeting before the summit of heads of states, which happens in July, so that we can fully address the issues that we are coming to address here. But there will not be any interruptions. Anybody who disrupts us in that meeting will have to be thrown out. We cannot tolerate this nonsense. It's intolerable.
That's all for today, but keep watching CNBC Africa for all the highlights of all the conversations here at the African Development Week 2017 in Dakar, Senegal.